used to work for us. She's recently retired, although not. And she took the rest of the team.
Hi everyone, welcome to you all for coming to my talk. It's quite a small, intimate audience and I really appreciate your presence. And I'm not used to holding a mic, so that's going to be interesting. I've called this talk Holes in the Landscape. So I'm a visual artist, as most of you know. My output's quite diverse, it's quite heavily research-led. The last few years I've been exploring features in the landscape that are elusive or have disappeared, vanished, medieval village that I couldn't find on a current map, tidal spaces that have sort of submerged a lot of the time, or lost trackways across the Isle of Thanet. And because I've got a studio in Margate and I'm based in Sandwich, a lot of my work has been around Thanet. And it was while doing a project in Thanet looking for lost trackways, I became quite obsessed with the sort of holes and pits and graves that are scattered throughout the island of Thanet. This project has come through, as you know, Kent Downs AONB and Salt and Earth Festival. And so my focus has been on the Kent Downs. And when this sort of project was first mooted, I thought I want to investigate pits and holes and all the kind of features you get on the Kent Downs that are underground, because I kind of like excavating. So when I make work, I'm excavating stories and narratives, but I'm also excavating physical material that I then use to make the work. Some of my work's quite immersive, some of it's small tools and handheld pieces. I started this project by looking at old maps. And I've got lots of old maps. And I could have looked at a Kent Archaeological Society map of features on the landscape. I started looking at old maps. And this is actually a map of Warren Street, which is a tiny village near Lenham. So if you go from sort of Lenham to Charing, you'll see it marked on the main road. And when I was looking at this section of the map, I saw, as you can see in my red highlighter, 4 Dene holes marked. And I didn't know what a Dene hole was. And actually, I didn't even know how to say Dene hole. And I still might shift between Dene hole, Den hole, Dane hole, because there's different ways of saying it and different meanings attributed to them. I'm from Kent, so to me, places like Tenterden end in den. So my inclination is to say Den hole. But I'm told by most people in the know that it's Dene hole. So I'll try and remember to go with Dene hole. So anyway, I saw these features on the map, I didn't know what they were, and I thought I'm going to start investigating Dene holes. How many of you know what a Dene hole is? Okay, well, I just wanted to start by thinking you've probably all heard about sinkholes or holes appearing in the landscape. This was a hole in the M2 that appeared in, I think, 2014, sort of Linstead. And turns out it was a Dene hole. You can kind of get a sense of the scale there, but also took 40 tons of pea shingle to fill it. So these Dene holes exist across the county. This one was in a field in an orchard at Hartlip near Sittingbourne. Swallowed 13 of the apple trees in the orchard. Similar time period to the M2 Dene hole. And this one I had to put in, it was in Essex, but I really like the headline. Home set to disappear into 30-foot crater dug by first century Brits, like those pesky first century Brits. And the fact that people had to take down their Christmas decorations. I was thinking your house is about to disappear into a hole and you're worrying about taking down your Christmas decorations. But anyway, so you know, this happens all over Kent and Essex. Dene holes tend to appear in Kent and Essex. And you can see the scale in this picture. And you hear about houses being swallowed by them. But there's lots of historical references to people being swallowed by them as well, generally surviving the experience. This is the first illustration I've come across of a Dene hole, and it's from 1610. It's by William Camden, and he has described these deep shafts going down, and then at the bottom, there's a sort of chambers cut into the chalk that form these beautiful, in this case, symmetrical shapes. So a Dene hole is a vertical shaft cut into the ground. Usually, I'm told by Kent Underground Research Group, who've given me a lot of information, they're about 60 feet deep. Can be 100 feet, can be shallower. Just to give you a sense of perspective, we measured, as I came in this room, this whole room is 60 foot in length, roughly. So if you imagine that inverted and going into the ground, that's the kind of scale you're thinking of, that these were dug down into the earth. What were they for? What were Dene holes for? Why would you dig 60 feet down into the earth? So William Camden has this beautiful quote where he says, "Like as elsewhere through this county are found pits of great depth, which being narrow in the mouth and very spacious beneath, have their certain distinct rooms or chambers, as it were, with their several supporting pillars of chalk. Concerning these there are diverse opinions. I, for my part, cannot tell what to think of them, unless they were those pits out of which the Britons in old time digged forth chalk or white marl to dung their grounds withal, as Pliny writeth. For they found pits, saith he, 100 foot deep, straight at the mouth, but of great capacity within, like unto these very same of which we now speak. And verily, nowhere else are they found but in a chalky and marly soil, unless a man would think that our English Saxons digged such caves and holes to the same use and purpose as the Germans did, of whom they were descended. For they were wont, as Tacitus writeth, to make holes and caves underground, and for those to charge aloft with great heaps of dung as harbours of refuge for winter, and garners of receipt for corn, because by such like places they mitigate the rigour of cold weather, and if at any time the enemy cometh, he wasteth only the open ground. But as for those things that lie hidden and buried under the earth, they are either unknown, or in this respect do disappoint the enemies, for that they are to be sought for." So he's saying a lot in that paragraph. And, I'm going back. He's referring to Pliny. So Pliny wrote about the Britons' habit of marling their soil. So the most common perspective is they were for marling the soil. So we'll come back to the sort of uses of the den holes in a minute, but he's confused about what they might be for. So we can all speculate on it in a bit. This photo shows Flaxman Spurrell on the left, who is a Victorian archaeologist, who is one of the first people to really write extensively about den holes. And I think one of the interesting things about den holes is that although the current thinking is that they were for extracting chalk to marl the soil, Flaxman Sparrow kind of didn't really know. He was very matter of fact. He kind of presented evidence. He kind of slightly connected them with very ancient flint mines like Grimes graves because of the way that they were worked. But he also thought, why would they do that? We'll come back to that. So the jury was out with him. He couldn't make up his mind about them. So Camden couldn't really make up his mind about them, couldn't decide if they were for marling the soil, for hiding, or for grain silos. Flaxman Sparrow wasn't 100% sure. He did make these very beautiful drawings. So the hole that you saw him sitting in was actually at Bexley. There's heaps of den holes around Bexley, Erith, Dartford. Unfortunately, they're not on the Kent Downs. They're just off the map of my research at the moment. But that was the main area of his research. But you can see these drawings of these deep chambers going down, these deep shafts with the sort of beautiful shapes at the bottom where people then went into these chalk caverns to extract the chalk. And you can also see on his drawing, he's got the interior of the cave, as he calls it, with these chalk pillars left. So each of the chambers was kind of linked to others. Very beautiful chambers that kind of helped structurally, I guess. But the other thing that sort of baffled people is that they were so carefully wrought, the chambers. Definitely made with pickaxe to begin with, probably bone, and then later with metal axes. So, just to reiterate, were den holes dug for chalk? Pliny says yes. Pliny in AD 73 said that the chalk is sought from a deep place, wells being frequently sunk to 100 foot, not quite sure how he knew the foot measurement, but you know, narrowed at the mouth, the veins spreading out within as in mines. This is the kind most used in Britain. It lasts for 80 years, and there is no instance of anyone who has put it on twice in his lifetime. So this is starting to embed the idea that by digging down into the soil for chalk, you hit really pure chalk. It hasn't had all the minerals leached out as chalk does near the surface. You can put it on the soil, it fertilizes the soil. It's so successful at fertilizing the soil, you don't need to put it on again in your lifetime. It's an amazing fertilizer. So this is the first hint of what it might be. And that is ecologically brilliant. So William Lambard, who just predates William Camden, who we saw before, he said there are to be seen near this town sundry artificial caves or holes in the earth, whereof some have 10, some 15, and some 20 fathoms in depth, at the mouth and thence downward, narrow, like the tunnel of a chimney or passage of a well, but in the bottom large and of great receipt, insomuch as some of them have sundry rooms or partitions, one within another, strongly bolted and supported with pillars of chalk. And in the opinion of these inhabitants, they were in former times digged, as well for the use of chalk towards building as for to marl the arable lands there within. So he's saying they were used for marling, for fertilizing the soil, but possibly also for building purposes. And certainly later, Dene holes would have been used for lime and in the building industry. It's also known that old Norman leases often contain covenants to ensure that chalk was regularly applied to the land. So I find this amazing that in this country, 2,000, 1,000 years ago, we knew how to get kind of natural fertilizer from the ground to put on the fields. There was a statute of Henry III in 1225 which gave every man the right to sink a marl pit on his own land. So you could sink a marl pit and get this material out to fertilize your soil. I've already shown you the drawing by William Camden. John Bannister, in a synopsis of husbandry, is adamant that it's for fertilizing the soil and gives a recipe for how to dig down and fertilize the soil. And then we spin forward to the 1950s. J.E.L. Cager did a lot of research and became adamant that these Dene holes were for extracting chalk for fertilising the soil. Currently, we have Rod Laguerre, who's very elderly, but is the living authority on Dene holes, and he again says that they're for extracting chalk for marling the soil. And then we come to Kent Underground Research Group. So when I started this project, I had several conversations with different members of Kent Underground Research Group, and they all said, the first thing they all said to me was, Dene holes were dug to extract pure chalk to fertilise the soil. Forget druids, forget anything else, forget all that romantic twaddle. It's for digging down to get chalk to fertilise the soil. But we have other views. So I've said I keep forgetting how to say the name. In Essex, they're called Dane holes. There's a theory that they're holes for hiding from the Danes. Seems unlikely. I wouldn't want to go down a 60-foot hole to hide from my enemy. But Chrétien de Troyes, he mentions these beautiful maidens, I think actually had a bad outcome in the story, conducting wayfarers to Puy, kind of like wells in the ground, but they didn't have water in to give sustenance to travellers. So this sort of mirrors this idea of a sort of hole in the ground that's somehow inhabited. William Lambard, still, he's slightly jury out because he talked about perhaps they were secret retreats for families and goods. John Murray in 1892 mentioned les souterrains de guerre around the Somme, these kind of underground hiding places. And Flaxman Sparrow, the guy we saw sitting in the Dene hole in 1865, he also talked about these fosses Saracen and fosses en Inglés. I'm not sure how you say that in Flemish, but again, these hiding holes that have names attached to the people you're hiding from, the Saracens and the English. So there is this theory that maybe these holes in the ground were hiding places. It seems unlikely. There's also a theory that they were underground silos for storing corn. So Diodorus Siculus in 30 BC wrote that the Britons had very mean habitations, but they did have underground silos to keep their corn in. I also came across in one of the books on the table, I'm sorry I forgot to write down that the reference, but Dionte in Saxon means harvest home. So it was a Victorian author, so I hope they did their research correctly. Some people have said, could there have been flint mines? This connection with Grimes graves and other Neolithic flint mines, but there's no evidence of any flint being taken away or material piled up. They just seem to be after the chalk. All these Dene holes that have been found have been empty spaces except for where they've caved in. There's this wonderful mythology of Cunobelin's gold mines. This is sort of history that there's gold mines scattered across England that Cunobelin dug, and here is a sort of ancient king, sort of very early sort of Romano-Celtic period. And there certainly is iron pyrites, and maybe that's the gold they were talking about. And some people will fancifully think that these were dug for gold mines, but that seems unlikely. Could they be underground dwellings? Dene, cave, sleeping place in Anglo-Saxon? Again, seems unlikely. Why would you go 60 feet down? You know, it's just too far. There's talk of them being refuse pits, probably because they've been found with earth in and a few Roman fragments, but they weren't deliberately filled in. There's talk about them being old entrenchments or earthworks. Walter Johnson in 1902 kind of like that theory, but most of them are in really remote locations. I think if you're going to dig a sort of fortification, you'd do it near water so you could sort of sail away from your enemy. And places of worship, possibly. You do get natural chalk holes in the ground, but they're different. These have definitely been worked by man, and the natural ones are different. Oubliettes, sort of for imprisoning people. Why dig down 60 feet when someone in a 12-foot hole couldn't get out? You know, you do get naturally occurring wells. These aren't wells, though. They're no evidence of them having been for water, although W.M. Newton in 1928, he used the testimony of someone who went down in 1909 who said one of the chambers at the bottom seemed to have been eroded by water, so he thought they were to get rid of surplus water on the site, but most of them are on the downs. Again, don't seem to be in locations where you'd really worry about getting rid of surplus water. So what really fascinated me about these was to speculate on what they might be. As I said, Rod Laguerre and Kent Underground Research Group adamant that they were for extracting this very pure chalk for marling the soil. And this is Rod Laguerre's drawing of how it would have been done. So it would literally been done with an axe, as I said, to begin with, would have been a bone axe and then later a metal axe. Someone down the shaft digging and someone at the top winching up the baskets of chalk. It still begs the question, why dig this deep chamber down when you could build dig a quarry that's bigger? And the thinking is that you're preserving the land around, you're not making a huge mess. A quarry takes up lots of space, creates lots of mess. You can also evacuate material from this a lot more easily, so animals don't get sort of injuries in their feet treading on a lot of flinty, messy ground. It's kind of neater. It's also a quite secretive way of digging and going under someone else's land. So they might have this sort of chalk under theirs. You can sort of sink your hole and go under their land. It seems like this is probably the reason they were dug. And if that is the case, it's a fantastic ecological recipe that we don't have now. You know, it's a natural resource that we could be putting on the fields to fertilise the land. This is one of the Victorian, sort of intrepid Victorian people that started going down them at the same time as Flaxman Sparrow. He made this drawing of the marks on the wall of the Dene hole he went down, and he sort of compared it to Grimes' grave. So I think that's why he's called it a grave, but that's the kind of markings of the axe. So he's made drawings of the axe markings that are all very careful, specific markings. And then this is his description in the diary, where you can see the axe mark shape that he's drawn, saying the latter cave that he went to was flat and smooth and only about 1 foot below the surface of the chalk stratum. The rough sides of the caves are covered all over with the marks of a pointed implement like a pick of this shape, all as fresh and perfect as if the caves had just been worked, which is kind of what everyone says. So I'm kind of coming back to all these theories, because what I've enjoyed about looking at Dene holes is I don't know that I'd want them just to be for extracting chalk. I like the mystery around them. I like the fact that no one knows for sure. I like the contradictions. So this is the Shell Grotto in Margate. This is not in the Kent Downs area, but Rod Laguerre made a drawing, which you can see on the right, of the Shell Grotto. And if you look at the green shape, that's possibly the shape of an original Dene hole, which was then expanded. And this is the sort of view up from the central chamber in the Shell Grotto, which suggests that it does look like one of the sort of Dene hole shafts. So it's a kind of really nice idea to think that the Margate Shell Grotto is an expanded Dene hole, and certainly there are lots of Dene holes in Thanet and holes of other sorts that have been changed and adjusted to make smuggling holes, been used in the war as refuges, all kinds of possibilities. This guy, I really like him. This is Deal Man. So Deal Man was found in St Richard's Road in Deal, in a chamber that was 16 foot deep. He was found by Keith Parfitt, who's a really respected archaeologist, and Keith Parfitt doesn't talk about it being a Dene hole. He just talks about Deal Man being found in a niche in this chamber, but the chamber had collapsed, so I do wonder if it might have been a Dene hole. And Deal Man, who is now in Dover Museum, he's tiny, by the way, he's about 18 centimetres. He's carved from chalk. He's really unique. There's only a few other chalk carvings like him because he's so obviously sort of Celtic. He's from the very early Roman period in Britain. And it's possible that he was, well, actually probably almost certainly that he was some kind of shrine offering, because he doesn't stand flat. He's got a sort of tilt on his base, but the ledge he was found in had the same kind of tilt. So it's really, I really love thinking that he was some kind of deity for this space, and I'd like to think that the space might have actually been a Dene hole, but there's no talk of that at the moment. I think the site's probably been built over because it's part of deal that's being built on. So my research, as I said, I started off looking at old maps. I contacted Kent Underground Research Group for advice, and the thing that sort of changed my whole approach to this project was getting hold of Dene holes by Harry Pearman. And Harry Pearman made this survey of Dene holes in 1965, and it's my age, so I'm very, I feel a sort of emotional attachment to the fact that in the time that the landscape's changed, I've aged as well, and I kind of see it in my time. But he went out to as many Dene holes as he found information about, and he mapped them. He put the grid reference, which was really useful for me, and he drew the ones he managed to descend into, he drew a plan of. Something I haven't said, Kent Underground Research Group said you won't be able to go down one. They're really dangerous. You need special ladders, you need ladder training. Lots of them have collapsed. You won't be going down one. So at this point I have to say, this quest, I haven't yet gone down a Dene hole. It's at the moment, I'm enjoying speculating on what they might be because I haven't actually been down one myself, although I have been in Grimes Graves and the Margate Caves, which is a sort of similar experience. So these were some of the Dene holes I went to look for using Harry's book. And I also started making drawings using his plans of the Dene holes. And these are the chambers at the bottom. These are some of the different chambers you get at the bottom of Dene holes. So if you see the dotted circle in the centre, that's the shaft that's going straight down. And then the other shapes are the chambers coming off the shaft. And some of them are really symmetrical. So again, this has led to people thinking, well, if you're just extracting chalk for the land, why are you building such a beautiful, symmetrical space? Doesn't make sense. You know, they're so carefully wrought. And a lot of the shapes repeat. So some of the shapes you find around here, you find repeated in Bexley and Essex. It's another part of the mystery. So I also think, on one level, they also remind me of the coccolithophores, that are the kind of origin of chalk. You know, this plankton that was in the water that died, and the sort of calcite shells that they had floated down and formed the layers of chalk that we have now. And there's something about these that make me think of those kind of sea creatures floating in the water. So when I used Harry's book and went to look for these locations, most of what I encountered was undergrowth. So the first one I went to was Charlton Wood near Kingston. Came to the area of woodland on the right and thought, I don't even know where to begin to look for this Dene hole. I'm not quite sure what I'm looking for. And I think the other thing this project's done is made me slightly tentative about walking across the landscape. We think of the first three images and the kind of way they've opened up. Now think, I'm a bit nervous about just walking willy-nilly in an area that is said to have a Dene hole in it. So one thing I didn't say to you is when these Dene holes, when they had extracted as much chalk as they wanted, they were filled in, but farmers tended to put a tree stump or some shrubbery in them and just cover them over. They weren't solidly filled in with 40 tons of pea shingle. They were sort of just blocked, and sometimes had old rubbish dumped in. So that's why they often open up. They weren't ever filled properly. So it has given me a slightly different perception of the landscape. I encountered this a lot looking for Dene holes. Going to locations which 57 years ago maybe were on off footpaths or on Harry had access to, and now heavily fenced, keep out. Again, very lush woodland. This was in Kingswood, looking for not in the side that you can access. This is in the private area, looking for 3 Dene holes that are supposed to be there. And again, Kent Underground Research Group said you'd find it a lot easier looking in the winter. There'd be less foliage. You're looking at the wrong time of the year. Try going out in the winter. But, I've been doing this project over July and August, so it hasn't been quite that straightforward. But I found a lot of the sites I went to, I just hit a wall with being fenced off, private, couldn't access the sites. And it's quite sad to see how the landscape has changed in more than the last 57 years. The area that is so rich in them around Bexley and Dartford and Erith is the woods that they were in are now motorways and built housing estates. So it's, they're probably going to open up at some point in strange places. The nearest I got to going down a Dene hole was going down the Dene hole at Shelditch Lees. This belongs to Countess Sons, and Kent Underground Research Group, the guys I was speaking to there were like, great, you're going down one, that's really good. It's been slightly messed around with, but it's a really good experience. They've got all the equipment, you can go down that one. That'll be safe, you'll have a good time going down that one. Glad you've managed to go down a Dene hole. I think it would sort of, stop me pestering them. So I was really looking forward to going down this Dene hole. The day of the descent, flash flooding had to be cancelled, or predicted flash flooding. I don't even think it rained. And even if they're carefully capped and lidded, you can't just go down them. As with mining, you get bad air at the bottom. It has to be checked that it's safe for people to descend. It's not just we'll get the ladder out and climb down. So I'm still hoping to go down that one. They gave me a what 3 words location for it to meet them there, and then obviously it was postponed. And I thought, I'll go and find out where this what 3 words location is. I knew it's in the Shelditch area. Took me to this house called Dene House. So I'm assuming it's in their garden, and they've got a Dene hole in their front garden. And this is some of the beautiful maps that Harry Pearman drew. So you can see on this page it's got Mosling's Hole at Oldcombe. I went to look for that one. It's got a back grill on it. It's on slightly private land, off some public footpaths, and it's sort of between Oldcombe and St Radigan's Abbey. The Lenham ones were actually the same map as I showed right at the beginning when I started this talk. This is what I found when I went to Lenham. So you can see the sort of shapes in the field, and then these kind of caps which were full of concrete. There were 2 others in the area which again were in woodland, couldn't find them. Going to go back and look for those. And then someone at Kent AONB alerted me to the Hucking estate, which has 2 Dene holes which you can see, which is brilliant. So I thought, finally I'm going to see some Dene holes, really excited. So this is a walk I led on Thursday. This actually isn't the Dene hole, this is actually Jack Cade's hole. Jack Cade was an amazing sort of peasant rebel in 1450 who stood up to the corrupt government. I think we need a Jack Cade now. And that the sort of rebellion went slightly wrong, and this was somewhere that he hid on his way back from London before meeting his demise in Heathfield. But we went to look at that. Possibly it was a filled-in Dene hole that foliage and trees have grown out of. But we did find this shrine to Dene holes. It's made me so happy. It's if you imagine this sort of fence area is this sort of size. And then it's really hard to do justice with the photos, but you can see the figures at the side as a perspective. The earth sort of shelves away, and I did have a real stomach-churning moment looking down, thinking, that looks deep. And probably about 8 foot in diameter. And this is Harry Pearman, map of the Dene hole. The bottom one, smokes wood, and if you look at the size of the shaft, that was 8 foot, but look at how big in relationship the chambers spread out from it. That's a huge space in the ground under that fence. So the chambers underneath spread so much further, and that's quite mind-blowing for me. And it's probably about, he reckoned, about 40 to 48 feet down, so sort of 3/4 of the length of this room down. This was another Dene hole on the Hucking estate. This one has a back grill on, and again it's huge, and it's quite a stomach-turning moment looking down that one. And apparently the whole landscape is littered with them. I thought I found one actually, because this is what I was saying about getting more fearful about just walking in the landscape. I saw this big hole that didn't seem to be a burrow, and it was in a hollow shape, and I'm thinking, maybe that's a Dene hole, maybe I don't want to walk on that bit of earth, in case it's opening up, in case the smaller hole is suggesting that it's opening up. Don't know. So really, this is kind of the end of my talk. So what I've been doing, I've been leading these walks, wearing the cloth that's on the table. It has the Dene hole chamber shapes on. It's my kind of talisman to hopefully see Dene holes. If I wear it, I'll see one. It's my lucky talisman. And this is me laying it out with a sort of chalk hole at the centre as you go down. I'm now trying to embark on making work about these Dene holes. Several things to say. So this is a point of research. It's quite rapid. I've been working over the summer and sort of put out lots of feelers for connections and links to meet people, to go down Dene holes, people who've gone down Dene holes, and liaise with geographers. So went to the geography department at Christchurch. None of them really knew about Dene holes, but they put me down another route of finding holes in another context. So that's another kind of aspect of the project. Kent Underground Research Group, one of the guys there, is taking me out to do back counts with him. Again, it's a winter thing. So he goes out to check the back grills, the hibernation patterns, and that's a sort of winter project. So a lot of the activity is a sort of winter activity again. So I'm hoping to see some sites over winter. I've met several people who've been down Dene holes as children, and one of them was amazing. He's from Bexley, actually Blue Water area. And he said he went down one as a kid that was, again, probably the same 60 foot as he gestured at a tree, and I would say the tree was probably 60 foot high. And he went down on ropes, but he was in an area where they found all kinds of archaeological material as kids. And that's something to say, is the other mystery about Dene holes is nothing has ever been found in them. Some pottery shards, some bits of bone, no tools, no implements. So all the different theories, if they were silos, no traces of corn or dead animals that might have eaten the corn. If they were religious spaces, no altars, no traces of anything sort of ritualistic happening. Nothing has been found in them. That's the even more of a mystery about them. Literally, the most that's been found have been a few pottery shards and a few bits of bone, but nothing conclusive, and they could be things that could have fallen down from the sort of surface area anyway. So kind of like these clean, empty spaces. I don't know what else I wanted to say to you about them, but for me it's a kind of adventure to go and find out more and to speculate on them. So my plans are to make my own axe, so I can make an axe to see what it'd be like to sort of dig out chalk, but I want to do it with bone, like the very ancient Dene holes. I would like to experiment with carving chalk. I've got very taken with Deal Man, so maybe some votives I think that don't exist need to exist for these Dene holes. And then maybe to think about the very visceral nature of going out in the landscape, experiencing these. So, you know, to imagine, at the moment I'm having to imagine what it would be like going down a shaft and being in this sort of chalk cavern at the bottom. But even being at the top, you know, sort of smelling earthy, wet ground and the plants and vegetation, it's very visceral, and my work is very much about making. So I'm trying to think how I can communicate something that's a kind of very engaged with the landscape experience in a kind of other context. I've been experimenting with making the shapes of the chambers out of porcelain, and I'm about to embark on seeing how I can use chalk in the ceramics themselves and then making these into bigger sculptures. But this is kind of where I'm at the moment, is a kind of the beginnings of a bigger project that might end up having back grills in it, or new stories for what might be in Dene holes. So I think that's all I've got to say to you at the moment, except for on the table, if you want to look at any of the books of maps or research that I've been looking at, you're very welcome. And if anyone has any questions or thoughts or speculations on what they might be, or if anyone's been down one, I'd be really interested to hear. So Grimes graves are Neolithic graves in on the Norfolk-Suffolk border that were they were kind of, I think they were re-excavated in the 70s. So I went there with Will Lord, and his parents were archaeologists who excavated them. And he's one of these reenactment people, so we did sort of flint napping there because they were actually to extract flint. But the difference with Grimes graves, when you go down Grimes graves, and it's all English Heritage have made it a very safe ladder to go down, in the chambers you can still see the abandoned antlers that they picked the flint out with, and there's very obvious seams of flint, and you know it's used in building or tools, whatever. These Dene holes, there's nothing, and there's no obvious use, there's not enough flint, there's sort of abundant flint elsewhere. There was, someone did, I can't remember which of those writers, one of them did refer to Kit's Cotty, which is near Maidstone. They found a slab over a pit filled with flintstones, but they don't know that it was a Dene hole. I mean, it's the only one of its kind that's been sort of evidenced in this part of the country. So they almost certainly weren't for extracting flint. But it's curious, you know, everyone says, but there's chalk all around. Why did they have to dig down? But it wasn't such pure chalk. The sort of minerals that make the kind of soil richer are all leached out. So the ancient people called it to sweeten or fatten the land with this sort of sweet, fat chalk at the bottom. So, you know, that seems to be the most conclusive idea, but I think still hazed in mystery. I think there was another question, yeah. Mm. You're probably right. I think a lot of it is logic. I mean, one of the writers referred to the manpower the ancients would have used, like bullock hide sort of ropes to go down, because bullock hide apparently is very strong. And you're right with the manpower, but they're still laborious to kind of carve out these chambers. They're not a quick thing. And because they're beautifully shaped and carved, I think that's something that people have commented on, is how beautiful they look when you go down them. But you're right, the symmetry, I think they just kept digging till they'd extracted as much soil as they, chalk as they wanted, or they'd exhausted that sort of pure soil, you know, because they had to dig a long way down to get to that kind of layer of pure soil. And I guess that's also why they're different depths, because in some places on the downs it would fall in kind of closer to the ground surface than in others. And I guess, you know, maybe it was a structural thing. That's completely likely. The romantic in me wants them to be sort of chambers for something else. I mean, the other thing to say about all these sites that I've been to, they're all kind of like remote places on the downs that they're not near fields where corn's grown. So the silo theory doesn't kind of figure, because you think it's not really an arable area, but it doesn't seem like a defence area because it's so far from other settlements or waterways. But equally, you know, why all the chalk here? You know, why are you extracting it here? There's so many mysteries. And in some places in North Kent, you get like 50 or 60 in one space. Like there's woods where they found 50 or 60 close together, which is also really curious, which I think that might be why some people felt they were ancient habitations and people going down. But I wouldn't want to go down a space that long to the bottom of a hole. I'd feel really vulnerable. So, yeah, it's really curious, but you're probably right about the manpower. And certainly Rod Laguerre's drawing suggests that a couple of people could manage it. And he actually met someone, so he's writing in 1965, he met someone whose father or grandfather who'd met someone who was still going round digging these, probably the last person. The sort of, I can't remember if I said it or not, but they were kind of dug from ancient times. There's definitely really ancient ones that are pre-Roman until the sort of Black Death period, and then the main periods were just before the Black Death, and then sort of when the sort of agricultural sort of labour was there again after the Black Death. It sort of picked up again until the sort of Industrial Revolution, and then I guess everyone sort of changed their practices, so until about the 18th century. But obviously it was still happening until the sort of late 19th century that they were still being dug. I'm not an expert though, I've just done some reading, and I'm an artist, so I see this through the lens of thinking, I really want to imagine this space, I want it to be all sorts of possibilities. I really, ecologically, I think it's fantastic that you can find something that can fertilise the soil, that's a habitat for bats. You know, I just heard the government are going to kind of remove some of the building restrictions with bats. They need all the spaces they can get. We also need Jack Cade to be resuscitated to fight fight the government. But you know, so there's brilliant ecological purposes to them. They're also, you know, because of the dangerous nature of them, a lot of them are on private land, the bats, people don't really want to advertise too much that they're there, because you don't want someone going on your land and falling down a 60-foot shaft. The stories I've read of people falling down, I've only read about one person dying down a shaft, and that was a man who fell down and was in one for 3 days and was pulled out but died of his injuries within the year, and he was 28. There's also a story of someone standing on a tree root pruning his apple tree, and it gave way, but he just about managed to hang on and didn't fall in. And then the stories of farmers in, I think, the 16th, 17th century, the horse being swallowed and dying in one that sort of opened up. One of the guys that I talked to who'd been down one as a child said they just used to go and play in them as kids. This is one near Faversham, and it had lots of chambers, and they actually used to steal candles from the church to put in the chambers to illuminate the chambers, and it's like their den, you know, and kids are fearless. The old guy I met from Blue Water said they just went down on ropes, you know, which was how people could have done, but they actually dug footings. So in lots of pictures you see these sort of footings marked in the chalk that people would have walked down in. So I think once you got to a point that the ground was sort of tough enough that you could dig a footing, you would have done that and used that as your way in and out. And that's also something I've thought about. Maybe I want to, you know, make my own Dene hole. If I'm not going to go down one, I'm going to make one. You know, I'm going to make you know, maybe a paper one or something, and ladders and ropes, and try and go down one. So I'm just trying to work out how to process all this information. And yeah. Yeah.
that we all read, and I related to that playing in this. We used to get down it because there was a lot of trees growing here, and now it makes me wonder, perhaps that was a Dene hole.
Could have been, yeah. I mean,
That's on the Medway, where you know you mentioned about the Tunbridge Road.
mm.
Well, East Farley, there's an old Roman bridge going through there. The Tunbridge Road on the other side, there's been a sinkhole twice. It's dropped down in the last 5 years.
But was it a sinkhole or was it a Dene
I
hole?
don't know.
So, you know, I think could be, yeah.
It's just a stone's throw off
Yeah.
on the north side of the Medway, and this was on the south side.
They're usually in clusters, so you're
So
probably,
it's not
it's
far
possible,
away. So
yeah.
I'm just wondering now, perhaps that was a Dene hole.
It's completely possible. And what you were saying, the guy that told me about going in and stealing the church candles to illuminate it, he said he went back later, and the farmer just put some sort of barbed wire, and then he went back again, and there was like rotting potatoes there. You know, those sort of weren't, a lot of them weren't valued. I think some landowners have sort of kept them and are proud of them, like Countess Sons on her estate, but a lot of people just see them as a nightmare because they're holes and they want to fill them as soon as possible. The other thing I should say, that Kent Underground Research Group, and I said, I think there's, I've heard there's like, maybe even 1,000 in Kent. They went probably at least 10,000, maybe more. Like there's so many around, so many. They're all around us. So, but particularly on the Downs and particularly in North Kent. So yeah, amazing. Yeah, I guess that would be completely possible, and I've sort of thought in making a piece of work, that's kind of the logical thing to do. It's just I'm just such a Luddite. It's probably why they appeal to me, is because I really like very prehistoric methods of making, and I really enjoyed sort of learning flint knapping and casting bronze in a sort of prehistoric way, and playing with clay and dyeing and using very early processes, and it's just that engagement with the landscape. When we were at the one in Hucking with the ferns growing around it, so, you've got this sort of damp, wet ferns, you've got the crunch of the sticks, and then you've got this sort of smell of earth, and then the sort of horror. It's so kind of, all your senses are kind of alert to it, and I just wonder how you create. That's what I'm grappling with. But I think you're completely right. Did someone else put that? Yeah.
What's the connection with all the lines that were made by the carving lines? Because you mentioned that with the graves as well. So, and they would seem to be very...
Yeah, they're very neat. They're very perfect. And I think when, I guess what, probably didn't articulate it very well, but what I was sort of trying to say was they were all hand done with axes, and it's very neat. Kind of, that drawing, the very neat, precise lines, to begin with would have probably been a bone or antler sort of axe, and then later with metal. And again, the care that was taken, I would just probably, if I was trying to dig out chalk, I'd probably hack, Yeah. Yeah, you'd be sort of hacking more, but doing it so carefully, that's added to the sort of mystery of why there kind of could be special chambers for other purposes. Yeah. Ah, yeah. Yeah.
You normally have powder coming off.
Yeah. That's true, because chalk is very messy, so maybe you need that care and precision to kind of work it. And you don't want to waste any of the chalk you've gone 60 foot down to. Yeah.
I wonder also whether in digging in this very neat way added a layer of symbolism that we've forgotten
Mm.
ancient people felt for the land.
It's more of a veneration than we have. Yeah.
In order to make a good fertiliser, that you would take it carefully and you would give it some extra meaning by doing that and by creating that nice space
Mm.
at the same time. I do wonder whether the triangular shapes
Yeah, I'm sure that there is a structure. The structural element is really key, and I think my understanding is they stopped. You know, they had to be very careful to the point they carved to and how these chambers connected. I guess it's just the symmetry is quite astonishing in some of them, considering you're sort of in a hole and sort of. You know, if it was me, it would just be a kind of round sort of shape till I could get round. But yeah, 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 yeah. Really carefully, yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's a really interesting idea. I should say that quite often in the research, you know, Kent Underground Research Group were like, forget all the stories of druids and things. Druids occasionally, you know, always pop up, especially in sort of Victorian ideas that had some connection with druids, and which I think is, you know, to quote them, twaddle as well. But, you know, this sort of veneration, this aspect, people have found workbenches down them, and I think one or two have had workbenches and mining lamps found down them, but they've been like 18th century. But some people have interpreted those workbenches as altars and a sort of added a sort of venerative component to them. But I think, you know, nothing else, apart from I'd like to think Deal Man, might be the sort of first sign of something that's more sort of deliberately and respectfully put down a chalk hole in the ground.
So I wonder if there's something in there about you are 60 foot in quite a dark hole, doing repetitive work for a long, long
Mm.
time, and that kind of playing games with yourself,
Mm.
like, no, I'm going to be as precise as possible and make
Mm.
these lines really neat, is a way of kind of losing
Mm.
yourself in your work as well. So it might
Mm.
also be just something about the repetitive
Yeah,
nature of the work that
yeah, quite meditative sort of process.
get yourself out of rhythm.
Also, if you're down a hole and you're mining chalk, you want to produce as little dust as possible.
Yeah.
So you don't want to be hacking.
Yeah, that's true.
You want to be carving
Yeah,
gently.
carefully, yeah. Yeah, really interesting. It's great hearing your thoughts, thank you. Maybe I'll do some very careful carving over the next few months when I've made my axe.
Maybe the chalk wasn't dry. Maybe it came off more like quick.
Yeah, you see, this is why I really want to go down one to see what the chalk at the bottom is. This sort of purer chalk. I've got this. It's like the holy grail, and it'd be really cool to get some and then to see what it's like actually trying to use it in growing and seeing how it affects plants as a sort of fertiliser. You know, there's lots of sort of tangents to this project that I think would be really exciting, really interesting, and really, you know, I'm just really excited to go out and see some back grilled Dene holes this winter, to be honest, you know, but also slightly fearful now. Oh, there's a hollow, and it's sort of 8 foot, and it looks like it could be a Dene hole shape.
Could you look at the research into other farming methods from the same period and just see if you get a connection between their thinking about the land so that you, and that might do as well.
Yeah, definitely find out more. I think you know this is the wall, the chalk wall that's been hit. There's just so little trace of anything in them to give clues, but you know it's just sort of historical recollections of farming practices. But yeah, definitely maybe liaising with someone like at Luddingston or kind of one of the people that are expert. Yeah, 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 definitely, yeah.
Yeah, it might be join up the farming dog.
Yeah, definitely. Not that I know of. All that was found, so Flaxman Spurrell, the Victorian, who was in the pit at the beginning, found some markings in one of them. I'm sorry, I just realised we might going for time. He found some markings which he said were very like ones in Cisbury, which are Neolithic flint mines. So that's all. No graffiti. Unless, I mean, I think there has been graffiti for more recent people going down them, but not ancient graffiti, yeah. I mean, some have been sort of, especially ones I've read about in Thanet, have been used as sort of converted as smuggling tunnels possibly, or, used as stores, used in the war, have sort of developed other uses, but none of these old ones have nothing. That's the complete mystery. Yeah, well, that'd be the next thing, to get across the channel and see what the French ones are like. Yeah, maybe they're more pragmatic about going down as well. I don't know. You're like, yes, you can. Yeah. No. That it's pretty much Kent and Essex. That's the mystery. Unless they were dug for another purpose and they just happened to be in chalk in Kent. So this is when people come back to the Dane hole idea. Like, we had them all over the sort of coastal areas to hide from the Danes, and it just happened that in Kent we had chalks, they were dug in chalk, and in other places they've disappeared because it's a different kind of soil, but the chalk's kept its structure. Who knows? But yeah, I think there might be like one or two somewhere else, but it's pretty much Kent and Essex.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Thank you for that talk. Thank you, everyone, for coming. If you hang around for the next half an hour, we have Sanjeev Gupta at 3 o'clock talking about the mega flood, so another aspect of chalk. So please join us for that, and we'll see you in half an hour's time. Thank you.